Hi, I'm Fran Maier, and thanks for being part of the Napa Institute Summer Conference 2020. And thanks, too, for checking out this presentation today. Our conversation in this session is about crisis church reform and the lay vocation. And if I were you, I'd be wondering, who is this guy? What does he know about the topic? And why should I listen to him? My background is actually pretty simple. I've been married for 50 years to the same beautiful woman. I have 4 children and 10 grandkids, at least so far, and 43 years working in and around the Catholic Church, 27 of those years in diocesan service, and 23 of those years as Chief of Staff to Archbishop Charles Chaput. So I hope I can make some of that experience useful to you in these brief comments today. One of the big struggles in our culture right now, maybe the main struggle, is over who and what a human being is. It's at the heart of all of our battles over sexual practice and identity. The birth of modesty in Scripture is connected to man's learning the hard way about good and evil, his self-awareness as a creature made in the image of God, and the duties that that implies. But there's a deep streak of individualism in the American personality, and along with it goes a deep resentment of any constraints on our license to own and reinvent ourselves. So, for example, if the church says that a man can't become a woman or have sex with whomever, whenever, and however he wants, or that a woman can't have as many abortions as she wants, then the secular world sees the church as an agent of repression, and she needs to be silenced. And that explains, at least in part, the constant religious freedom battles we now face. It also helps to explain the toxic nature of our politics, and it also explains why faithful Catholics need to be politically aware and engaged. Now, what I've just said can be distressing, but I think it's the opposite. I think it's simply the truth, and the truth really does make us free. Not comfortable, but free from our illusions, free to see the world as it really is. We can't control the circumstances that other people create for us, but we usually can control how we respond to them. The challenges we face also remind us as believers that our real home, our mater et magistra, our mother and teacher, is the church. George Bernanos, the great French Catholic writer of the last century, liked to describe the church as a huge transport company carrying people to heaven. But it's a transport company with a regrettable record of train wrecks. And that's because, left to her human management, the church tends to end up, in the author's words, as one huge pile of overturned locomotives and burned out carriages. The thing that saves the church in every century from total catastrophe is her saints. And by saints, the author meant more than just the holy men and women whose names we all know. He meant ordinary believers like you and me who love God and love the church, not just when it's easy, but when it's hard. Not just when it's socially acceptable, but when it's not. Not just when the church has prestige, but when she has the contempt of the world. Which is exactly where we are as Catholics right now, dealing with the hostility of people and leaders who resent the church and what she teaches. And many times we can't even defend ourselves because of the very real problems of dishonesty, sexual dysfunction, financial mismanagement, and poor leadership within the church herself. Those of us who are parents know that whining accomplishes absolutely nothing. As lay people, our task is to focus on repairing and building up the church rather than tearing her down. It's easy for us to forget that the church has always been in turmoil somewhere on the planet. We're just not used to it here in America in our lifetime. Peace, purity, and unity for the church are aberrations in her temporal life, not the standard. And the reason for that is brutally simple. She's inhabited and she's led by sinners. There's a verb in ancient Greece, krinein, which means to decide, and a noun, krisis, which means decision. The Greek word krisis is the root of our English word crisis. And in a sense, that's whatever human life is. It's a series of crises, one crisis or decision after another, determining the kind of persons we become. The tasks of helping to reform the church and of living an authentic lay vocation begin or end with the central crisis facing each of us, which is primarily not out there in the external problems of our culture or the institutional church, but in here, in our hearts, in the conscience and soul of every one of us. It involves the decision in each of our hearts to stay in the church or leave her, to stand with the church or slip away, to believe what she teaches or not. The most basic problem we face within the church is one of faith, not structures or resources. Money and resources follow strong beliefs. And too many self-described Catholics don't really believe what they claim to believe. That's been obvious for a while in diminishing mass attendance and financial support for church ministries, and the COVID pandemic will likely accelerate both of those trends. This makes our support for the church as laypersons more important than ever. The fact is that most U.S. bishops are good men. They're sincerely committed to their people, and they're doing a very difficult job remarkably well. The practical challenges of running a modern diocese, and I know this from experience, are massive, especially in a period of government and media pressure and overall decline in sacramental practice. The diocesan problems that you and me, that people, believers, faithful, see from the outside are usually only the tip of the iceberg. The demands of leading the church in this age are all absorbing. So our bishops really do deserve, have earned, and need our prayers and support. Now, having said that, fidelity in the church is no different from fidelity in a good marriage. The mutual obedience of a husband and wife is ordered to truth. It requires speaking the truth with love to your spouse, especially on matters of substance, whether he or she wants to hear it or not. And exactly the same respectful candor needs to mark our relationship with church leaders. There's nothing ordinary about our baptisms. It's the sacrament that undergirds the entire church. It makes every one of us, every layperson, a disciple and a missionary. And that can be enormously powerful, even when its fruits aren't immediately obvious. I asked a bishop friend of mine once, he's serving now in one of the Western states, what put him on the road to the priesthood. He said that when he was 6 or 7 years old, his mother told him a story. And the story goes like this. When he was an infant, she took him to church, she laid him on the altar in the dark, and she asked God to protect and guide him to a life that would make a difference. She never pressed him to become a priest, but he could never get that story out of his head. And the idea that his life had a purpose, these things really haunted him as he grew up. And eventually they led him to at least try the seminary, then be ordained as a priest, and then eventually end up leading his own diocese. I have another friend whose father clipped a picture from a mission magazine of a merry old priest being mobbed by enthusiastic, smiling African kids. His father then blew that up 4 feet tall and framed it on their kitchen wall. He never said a word about it. It simply appeared. The family rarely talked about it. But for 10 years, with every mouthful of every meal the family ate, they looked at that picture, and it burned a sense of mission into his heart that affected his whole life. As lay people, we sometimes secretly enjoy the clericalism we find in the church because it gets us off the hook. Clericalism is not just a clergy problem. It's also a lay problem. It lets us blame the clergy when things go wrong, when in fact we're fully co-responsible, as Benedict XVI said, for the life and the mission of the church. That's a powerful word, co-responsible. We don't think of it that way very often, but that's in fact the case. Lectoring, serving as extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion, volunteering as catechists, or in social ministries, or on finance or pastoral councils, joining a good lay apostolate or movement. All of these things are beautiful ways of expressing the Catholic sense of mission as laypersons. But we also need to insist, for example, on financial transparency and accountability in church governance, from our local parish to the Vatican itself. Archbishop Chaput, whom I mentioned I served for many years, always stressed, both to his clergy and to the people he served, that the resources of the church belong to the people, not to some faceless religious corporation. The church holds the money donated by the faithful in trust on their behalf in order to advance the mission of the gospel. And that means that the church has the duty to use those resources with scrupulous honesty and effectiveness, and to make a full, open, and regular accounting of those resources to her people. We also need to insist that sexual problems are rooted out from our seminaries before they can become disasters in our clergy. And that means we need to name problems honestly. Men dealing with same-sex attraction have the same path to holiness and the same call to chastity that we all do. Many live exemplary lives. But it's simply a fact that homosexuality figured heavily in most of the clergy sex abuse crises that have plagued the church over the past 40 years and hurt her mission terribly. If we don't name the problem candidly, we can't fix the problem properly. Fortunately, at least in the United States, a lot of very positive progress has been made on that issue. We lay people are planted in the world to change the world for the better. One of the key goals of the Napa Institute is literally to activate lay people, to turn us from just consuming church life on Sunday to actively supporting it, contributing to it, and helping our priests and bishops in appropriate ways to lead it. At the same time, we should never forget that it's the little things, ironically, that emerge naturally from being absorbed in a love for God that imprint themselves intimately on the lives of other people through our witness. And any of us can do these things. Earlier this summer, I finished rereading actually for the third time, the Lord of the Rings trilogy. The Lord of the Rings movies that Peter Jackson directed were good, but the original novels are so much better. Early in the trilogy's second volume, The Two Towers, Aragorn, who eventually becomes the king of Gondor, tells his friend Gimli the dwarf that, and I'm quoting here, "Ours is but a small matter in the deeds of our time," close quote. It's a great line. Ours is but a small matter in the deeds of our time. Of course, the irony in those words is that the whole Lord of the Rings trilogy, the whole titanic struggle against very powerful evil that J.R.R. Tolkien writes about in his story, hinges on two insignificant, unimpressive, utterly unimportant hobbits who refuse to abandon their task. They just do their job. They don't quit, even when it's hopeless and suicidal to keep going. The lesson there is this: whether we're a mother or father, a secretary or a mechanic, a teacher, tailor, or candlestick maker, assistant to a bishop, or the CEO of a Fortune 100 company, the lay vocation remains the same: using the raw material of our circumstances to give glory to God and to help other people share in his redemption through the witness of our lives. If we do that, we've done what we were made for, and the world and the church will be better for it. And here's the secret: there's joy and hope, meaning and satisfaction, and a world of friendship with other good women and men that make life worth living and every burden worthwhile. So have a great conference, and God bless you.